Ancient spiritual masters compared spiritual life to what? Yeah, to war. To war. It's everywhere in their literature. And here we're talking about ancient traditions that could actually prove that they could completely transform human life, transform mind, transform body, transform the entire person, liberate your potential. And these were ancient mystical traditions, still in use everywhere in the world, ancient mystical traditions that documented their successes over centuries. So we're talking here about things that are largely unknown in the West or misunderstood, whether it's the ancient Christian mystical tradition, whether it's Buddhist or Hindu or Taoist mystical traditions, to name just a few. Now that's completely different from modern religion, by the way. So when we talk about religion, if you want to know more about the distinction, you can see my best-selling book from nearly 2 decades ago, The 5 Pillars of Life. That's first edition's no longer in print, but I can send you an electronic copy if you want more background. But in there, I discuss the difference between what we consider religion in the modern world and what spiritual life actually is. So what did these ancient masters see as spiritual life having in common with something as apparently different as the military of the time? It was a number of things. First of all, it was precision. The ancient warrior's life was dictated by precision. They needed to be very precise about what they did. In other words, to use modern parlance, they had standard operating procedures, right? Standard operating procedures liberate the mind because faced with certain circumstances, your training causes you to execute the same actions over and over in response to those circumstances. So it frees up the mental bandwidth. It frees you from your emotionally driven rational mind and allows you to function far better. So you learn how to master the basics. You get really, really good at the basics. To an outside observer, you might appear inflexible and obsessive. And yet, you know, based on your own experience, that that is what is providing your progress. That is what's keeping you safe. The second thing was that warriors in the ancient world, as soldiers today, I suppose, have to be okay with the fact that death is very close, right? You have to be able to defy death. You're always putting yourself in harm's way. And in the ancient world, that was definitely the case. You have to be able to prefer death to surrender in certain cases. You have to be able to, really, you have contempt for pain and death. That's what it comes down to. And ancient mystical traditions spent a lot of time focusing on that, getting rid of that fear of death. So very, very important. The third thing was they realized that in the ancient world, the warrior had to have his mental focus in the present moment. You know, we always talk about mindfulness meditation these days and stuff like that. Well, this is it. They had to be focused in that present moment because death was a microsecond away. So if you were a samurai in Japan, for example, death was a microsecond away, whether you were on the battlefield, whether you were sitting in your own house, or whether you were walking through a village. Death was a microsecond away, and you had to be completely calmly centered in the present moment in order to react fast enough to save your own skin. Absolutely crucial to be able to do that. And of course, for spiritual traditions, it wasn't so much the physical danger of being sliced and diced at a moment's notice, but it was the mental discipline to keep the mind in the present moment, because anything outside of that completely trashes what spiritual life is trying to accomplish. So obsessing about the past, obsessing about the future, totally off track. The interesting thing is that the spiritual traditions and the martial traditions of the time used the same techniques to achieve this mental focus, to keep the mind in the present moment, to cultivate this mindfulness. And all of this expanded the definition of what warriorship is. So warriorship as a paradigm for approaching life, which is what it was in the mystical tradition, warriorship is this paradigm for approaching life, was all about moving toward reality itself, finding reality itself, fighting your way to see the world as it truly is, not as your senses tell you it is, but to apprehend it through your own experience, through what was necessarily a huge amount of effort. And it was defeating all the conditioning that the mind goes through in the process of growing up. In other words, it's no exaggeration to say that spiritual life was the ancient world's version of mindset training, because its purpose was nothing less than to eliminate all that conditioning and liberate your own true potential. So everything we talk about in the world of mindset, where did we get it from? Well, heck, we got it from ancient spiritual traditions largely, because they were already doing the same things. They may not have had exactly the same neuroscience that we do. They may have explained things in different ways, but that's really what we're talking about here. So it was to remove the ego, the false self, the negative self-obsessed self, and find the true self. So it was also the ability to center the mind for long periods of time on a particular goal. So this is more than just staying in the present moment. This is being able to use the mind to focus on a particular goal that you want to achieve and stay there pretty much undistracted for days, weeks, months, years. Very, very important. And of course, the physical conditioning that went into being able to do this was huge. So if you think, that ancient mystical traditions were somehow physically easy, or you could just sit around and meditate all day, no. There was huge physical conditioning that went into all this, because they understood that the human mind-body organism is the workshop in which all this takes place. So it has to be optimized. You cannot have optimal brain functioning unless you're physically fit. You cannot have optimal emotional functioning unless you are physically fit. It won't work. It doesn't happen. Something modern religion, of course, totally overlooks because it's completely cerebral. So all this to say, in the definition of the mystical traditions, a soldier is not necessarily a warrior in the true sense, although he could be. Or to put it into the modern context, he or she could be. So warriorship, in this overall use that we give it as a life paradigm, this has a long history, a very long pedigree, and it is indeed a life paradigm, which is much different than an ideology that prescribes how you'll see the world. We'll talk more about that in a later video. So it liberates your true potential, it leads you to your true self, to reality as it is, and gives you the tools to cultivate the abilities to get there, specific methods to get there. You have to have the methods, otherwise it's impossible to get there pretty much on your own, so it's very difficult to do. And fundamentally, of course, it's not comfortable. No, it's not comfortable. There is nothing comfortable about those ancient mystical traditions, and their modern versions too are not comfortable. We like to think of spiritual life often as, oh, it's really comfortable. We just think nice thoughts or whatever it is, and we don't have to work too hard. Nonsense. Total nonsense. And it's also not about giving you something to make you feel better. Here's an answer to your question, your weird metaphysical question. Why do bad things happen to good people, for instance? Here's an answer that'll keep you satisfied. No, there are no easy answers. There are no easy answers, and all answers, according to the ancient mystical traditions, are things you have to discover in your own experience by going within. Otherwise, it means nothing. So these are some of the reasons why ancient mystical traditions refer to spiritual life as the way of the warrior, and why this warrior paradigm is so universal and so easily applied to all of life, not just spiritual life, but mindset and liberating your human potential. Warriorship, which will, we don't talk about warriorship on this channel. Well, we talk about it, but not in huge depth. We reserve that for our own community to go do the deep dive, how this is actually done. But it is the most powerful life paradigm you can ever find. I'm Dr. Simeon Roger. Take care. We'll see you in the next video.